Guru Nation. It's a very special guest. I've known this man for a decade or
Forever,
longer. Forever.
forever.
In our world, forever. Andrew Mitchell. He's a extremely knowledgeable consultant. He works in the pharmacovigilance safety side. I've known you back with Intralinks, which
I
became
was your,
a
I was your first
household
sponsor,
name.
right?
The
Yeah.
first sponsor was the first clinical trial guru sponsor was Intralinks, thanks to Andrew and team. And a lot of that team went on to do like really cool things and throughout the industry.
Well, you are our chicken whisperer. So I was in marketing back then. I've always been in tech and life sciences tech, and this consulting thing is a new gig for me. So brave new world. But back then, we were trying to follow this principle for marketing of, I think it was Tractor Supply had a chicken. There was a chicken whisperer who was really popular for his talk show about, how you look after chickens. And they had the guy come around to their store, and that brought in a lot of traffic to their store. Um, because people wanted to meet the chicken whisperer that was so popular. So I was like, well, who can be our chicken whisperer for clinical trials and how we do study startup and site feasibility and safety-led distribution, and who can talk about the real problems that actually happen at the sites. And yeah, you had a hoodie and you seemed interesting. So
The hoodie was, I still have it. It's too hot in Arizona to wear it right now, but in the winter it comes back. Um,
Mhm.
Believe it or not, we're still using Intralink. I don't think they know that we still have an account. Like it's
Okay.
shout out
Hopefully
to
they're not.
them. They're not
Yeah.
even in research anymore, but it's really cool. We've obviously not depending on it anymore, but it's nice that I'm still able to use it. CRA Academy, Intralinks, every CRA Academy student knows Intralinks now. And shout out to Creo as well, who's the latest sponsor, and we've been using them for those academies as well. But me and Andrew go way back. Used to meet up a lot at different conferences, and since then you went to Viva, right?
Yes, I
First.
was the first person that Viva hired to build their safety system.
No
And
way. I remember when you told me about Viva, I never really heard about them because they were not a site household name. So you were
and
like, yeah,
now
Viva. I
now
was
they
like, what
are.
is this? Now well, they were trying to be. I think they're becoming because of Bree Burks. Did you ever work with Bree?
No.
No. Okay. So you were there before Bree got there because
I
she's like
was
running
there.
it.
Yeah, I was there before Bree, and there was some focus while I was there on how to use Viva for sites. Most of Viva's business is, obviously selling to sponsors. They started off on the CRM side, and then they got into R&D applications like ETMF and regulatory and quality, and I was there to help launch their safety system and build out that team. Um, and selling to sites and support, well, not maybe not selling to sites, but certainly working directly with sites instead of working through CROs or working through sponsors is very different.
Yes.
um, Especially for the kind of sites that you represent, where you're not just talking about, big complex research organizations like the Mount Sinai's of the world, but yeah, the folks,
You
in the
brought
week.
you basically brought my attention to Viva and they sponsored me like 3 years later. But it was initially because of you and I was blown away. I went to their summit. They have it every year. I went to that first one that I went to in 2019 in Philly, and another guy named Jason was
Yes,
running it back
yes.
then, and all because of you. And then so after Viva, then you went to Akivia.
IQVIA,
So
yes.
I got your
I spent I
career
spent the
history
last
down pretty well, man.
I spent the last 5 years at IQVIA. I started off my career as a software developer as well. And I'm originally from Cape Town, South Africa, for those people that don't know or don't recognize the accent. Moved across to the UK, ended up at Covance. So IQVIA was my second CRO. And in between all of that, I've also worked at Medidata. So I'm pretty familiar with Rave and the EDC systems that you guys spend a good amount of time in.
Yeah, Rave is the dominant force in the space. Viva recently released a EDC that's pretty decent though. Coordinators seem to like it. But Rave is the one most like that's the one that's used most often. Um, so all that knowledge over these what, 2 decades plus?
Yeah, yeah, pretty
Wow.
much.
Andrew, we're getting old, man. We're getting
I
old.
know, I know, and the world is changing even faster with all this AI stuff.
We're gonna talk a lot about this because now
So
you're a consultant,
yes,
right?
now I can speak my piece, and I'm not beholden to anybody. So this
Freedom.
conversation
Freedom.
might be a little bit controversial, but we'll see.
Well,
I hope
that's what we do. We don't
I'm gonna
want
ask questions.
mouthpieces on this show. There's a reason why people, very few people from big organizations come on because I know and they know they're not allowed to speak freely, and that's why it's commendable when they actually do. People like Bree Burks, people like Liz from Inato, Ray from Creo. They're out there, but it's few and far between. No one's trying to risk their job just for a podcast. So
Well, there are a lot of people working really hard, and there are also a lot of people banging their heads against the wall every day trying to make things better. And it's not always easy.
what's the biggest cause of headbanging?
Ooh, I would say one of the big causes, I don't know if it's the biggest, but certainly a lot of teams are not structurally or organizationally set up for success. So, like, whether you know, like here's a classic example. Okay, there's a problem. It needs to be solved. Is the solution to get 40 people in a meeting on a Zoom call, or is the solution to figure out who can solve it and then empower them to give them whatever they need to get it done and get it done fast? And there are a lot of companies, unfortunately, where the default response is the first one. It's like the default response to, a client has a problem is give me a week, I'll come back with a plan, rather than let me understand your problem, let me replicate it, let me get to the root cause as quickly as possible, and then I can come up with, you know, what might be needed. And it's tricky because there are a lot of competing priorities inside of an organization. And um, I've worked for a lot of different companies, some that are kind of sales driven and some that are product driven. And certainly, while Viva is, since we're talking about them, is phenomenal when it comes to sales and marketing. Like their sales and marketing team are second to none, as you would have seen with the summit. They're also very much still a product led company. I mean, one of the things that really surprised me when I was there was that Peter Gassner, the CEO, who's worth a fair amount of money, was still reviewing our data model back then. Like, at the end of the day, he wants to understand technically how everything worked, even if he didn't understand the domain and didn't understand safety and still had a lot to learn in that space. And that's very different from a lot of organizations where, you have a pure salesperson at the top and the only thing that they're caring about or looking at or understanding is numbers. And often the focus is too much on, what's the next quarter going to bring or what is our message to the street, not, what are we strategically doing and how we leverage our competitive advantage and what are we going to do that's going to get us over the finish line altogether in the long run, not just what makes one group look good, when another one might not.
Yes.
So yeah,
Eh,
I think so. So that and culture are the biggest things. If you're in a culture where everybody knows they're in the same boat together and they're going to sink or swim together and they're all rowing in the same direction, and you aren't looking to point fingers and blame each other, that's crucial compared to a culture where people are not encouraged to take risks and where if somebody rides to somebody else's rescue, then it makes them look like a hero and they now have an excuse for why they didn't hit their own timelines. That's when you start to see a very toxic environment, um, and where yeah, struggle to deliver what everyone's actually wanting to do. Because nobody goes to work and wants to have a bad day, or goes to work and wants to do a bad job. But it's about how do you empower and set people up for success. And that's not easy to do, especially when you're dealing with organizations that are thousands of people and that have been around for a long time.
And to be clear, because on this pod we often talk about a lot of issues sites face, but you're just talking across the board, like organizationally wise, rolling out a new product or a new
Hmm.
objective, culture. I've never been a part of a big organization, so I'm a little bit lost when people discuss these kind of things, but it seems like after a certain point you lose the startup spirit and it becomes a spirit of protection rather than pioneering. And
Protection and fiefdoms and
mm,
yeah, politics. Yeah, absolutely.
mm,
It's very difficult to keep that entrepreneur. I mean, look, hey, we see it in our industry. What most drugs change hands at least 2.5 times before they make it a market.
mhm.
Like, like innovation is hard to do at scale.
How do you think we can do it better? Like, what can be done better? Right now, the industry is just fragmented in all different kinds of places. No one's really holistically looking at it and saying, "Hey, this is the study process from pre-startup to close out." Just to name one example, you come from the world of safety. I mean, that's a whole
Hmm.
other like workflow there. How do you?
Unharmonized, incredibly complicated, treated as a cost center for a lot of companies. I mean, I think like if we take a step back, and I'm going to turn around and ask the question back on you because like when you and I started working together, we were trying to do remote monitoring and how and the electronic investigator side file and how do I have CRAs spend less time at sites locked in a room looking at
Man, you were
documents
doing what
or trying
Viva was
to
doing today back then.
we were doing it 10 years ago, and we could have told you some of the problems that the DCT folks were going to run into, and that COVID was a blue
Uh-huh.
moon event, blue swan event, or whatever. But
Yeah.
my question to you is that, like, if you look at like some of the money that has gone, that was invested in these kinds of technologies, if if the industry could take a step back, I mean, fundamentally with clinical trials, we give drugs to patients. Patients are people. You have to interact, like people do business with people. And people also take drugs because there is a need for those drugs. And that need is generally because their life is not in the place that they would like their life to be in, or their family members or whatever. If we take a step back and we said, you know, forget about all the technology, forget about, how many folks there are in the middle of the process, what can we do to make it easier for when a subject walks into your front door and says, I'm going to risk my health and I'm going to take this leap of faith and I want to be part of bringing potentially a new drug to market that's going to help other people to get through what I'm trying to get through and struggling today. Like, where would you like to see the money go that's going to fundamentally make a difference in that interaction?
The easy answer is to say we need to invest in the sites, but I need to be careful what we wish for because I think what would end up happening is institutionalization of small community sites, which is probably not the end result that we would want. Um, and the other answer, the altruistic answer, would be to give it to research naive physicians in communities that are underserved, helping them do studies to contribute to their communities, but also to the greater ecosystem, especially now with diversity and all that kind of stuff.
So lower the barrier of entry for what it takes to run your clinical trial the first time
Yeah, yeah,
and have more hand holding, whether it's
yes,
a person or whether it's an AI co-pilot that's
yep,
kind of holding your hand or filling in some of the paperwork
yep.
or helping the subject that's enrolled in that trial. It's it's making that part easier.
But how do you incentivize or how do you reward those large companies with the cash to do that when they are also inevitably helping their competitors by doing that. I mean,
Well,
that's the that's the
but
hard part.
that's the crux of the matter because they're not altruistic. Their
Hmm.
goal is to, drive revenue and hit targets and produce returns for their shareholders and grow their organization. And they would much rather, for example, develop synthetic control arms or a synthetic patient in a trial,
Hmm.
and all these things that look great on paper that can help, improve, what their value is on the street or what their value might be with the VC community.
Yep.
And that isn't necessarily helping you
No.
and helping that subject
Doesn't
in
help
the trial.
patients for sure.
And we don't know if it works or not.
I think what helps is financing entrepreneurs like willing to go out into these areas and start. Like
So is
there
it
was,
easy? So how easy is it for somebody to take out a loan and stand up a clinical site?
it's not easy, and I don't think you need the
There's
loan
nothing
though.
unique. Okay, you don't think.
There's no IP in it either, which is the problem. Like you're essentially asking big companies to improve the process, but then the answer is, well, it's going to help everyone in return, including your competitors. So they wouldn't do it. So we're at this crux where we kind of know the answer, but then everyone's positioning, well, how does this answer, where's my angle on this answer? And it
Mhm.
comes back to stuff you said, which is like more bullshit. So that's why we get like 15 vendors per trial. And yeah, I mean, everyone says they're trying to help. And sure, they'd some do more
Everyone
than
wants
others.
everyone wants a piece of the study budget. I mean, I remember with remote monitoring, one of the challenges we ran into was the sponsor doesn't pay for it. The CROs pay for it.
Yeah.
And the sponsor will and the CROs will charge whatever the market is prepared to pay. So if the sponsor is prepared to pay for something, there's less incentive to be more efficient and change the way that you've always done things, especially when we're so risk averse as an industry. And I don't need to be the most efficient trial. I just want my drug approved because I'm betting my entire company on this drug and it's whether I can get it through market. So it's understandable that firstly, CROs want to make money. So they're looking to maximize their returns and they don't necessarily want to throw their business model up in the air. And their buyers, the people that they're trying to sell to, generally aren't looking to take risks and try a whole new way of running their trial. If there's a tried and tested way that's worked for 30 years, and if it costs me a bit more, well, it costs me a bit more, but you know, this isn't the one that I'm going to take the chance on. So it's difficult. It's like a chicken and egg situation. And
Yes.
unfortunately it feels like you guys to some extent at the sites are kind of at the receiving end of that because the pain often lands in your lap.
Sure. Maybe the solutions are at the sites if we're in a decentralized world. Can we agree that just take CROs out of it? Can we agree that sponsors more or less want predictability when they're planning a trial and
Absolutely.
coming up
Yeah.
with schedules and
And they want to know they would love to know how many subjects are going to be enrolled
right, to
and
the
all
T,
that kind of
like to the exact
stuff.
number and
Yeah.
exact day and minute. If they can do in the second, they would do that. Now, so what's standing in the way of that then? Well, the unpredictable nature of the industry is one, but number
Hmm.
two, it's a bunch of fat in between the sites and the sponsors. And that
And
fat has been hired and in many cases built by former sponsor people to bring some element of control, but it turns out that that element of control created more chaos than
there are a lot of consultants who've made a lot of money, but there's also, I mean, you also don't have an efficient pipeline because if I'm a site, I don't know what study I'm doing next.
Mm,
Like you're applying, you don't know which ones are going to come through and which ones aren't. If
right.
you knew which studies you were gonna, and you knew you had like a 6 months lead on exactly which studies you were going to do, that would make your life a lot easier. It would make the sponsor's life a lot easier. But we're in a world where everyone's trying to do studies as fast as possible, and we don't know we don't know which drugs might fail along the way and not even make it to the site because we didn't the drug didn't get that far, or where you know sorry, I can't do this one because I'm now on another study and I don't have the staff.
I
So,
think,
but
yeah, I think
yeah, so
sites could prepare for if they knew, first of all, the studies they would be getting, they would still try to get more. But they would
mhm,
be able to invest in the long run as opposed to there's a lot of sites just stuck in the let's keep the lights on phase. And then there's some
yeah,
that have gotten beyond that and are thinking further ahead. And interestingly enough, those ones are thinking about creating the solutions to some of these problems we're discussing. And it's not even the core competency of a site. But
yeah,
in
it
10
tells
years
you how
from now,
desperate they are for a solution as well.
that's right. But 10 years from now, does it become a core competency of a site? Like, I don't know. A core competency of a CRO was never to give a patient a e-diary, but it kind of became that because technology allowed for that revenue stream to be unlocked. And then they justified that, hey, well, why would we hire someone if we can just do it ourselves and create this new revenue stream? And okay, we got a monopoly on it because the sponsor's gonna have to use that ePro if they're using us, and they already want to use us for everything. So now we can just
Hmm.
throw in some bloatware on the sites and don't worry too much about UX, UI because there's nowhere else they're gonna go. They need us for our safety and all that other stuff. The sponsor would rather keep everything under one roof. So created more of a problem than it did a solution. And I often wonder if we extrapolate out 10 years and you can argue that the sites replace some of the work of the CRO, do they actually make it more streamlined or just increase the chaos even more?
Well, I think part of that is is the question is what's going to happen around AI and these
Big
large language
game
models and
changer,
this
game
technology,
changer.
how much of a game changer that's going to be. And I think that so firstly, you have to take a step back and realize that we're only in the very, very first innings when it comes to AI. And probably a good analogy that I've heard, or one of the best analogies that I've heard, is that this is like when mobile phones came out, and how quickly and phenomenally it just changed the game. But at the same time, the Nokias, the Ericssons, even the Blackberries, they're not around anymore. There are no guarantees that 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the open AIs, the Claude, the Anthropics, etc., the ones that are really leading the race with these frontier models are going to still be in the pack, never mind leading the race. We're that early on in the game, but the genie is very, very, very much out the bottle, and we can expect improvements in terms of what the cost is, what the efficiency is, how we understand where we can or shouldn't be using these tools. And you certainly see a lot of people kind of speaking generally, like, how do I use AI in an organization? Going, well, I can see a lot of the quote unquote middle management functions being, taken out of the equation where, I can have AI easily do the kinds of um, tables and summaries and tabulations and the work that kind of is seen as more middle management activities. And especially as we start to go down the agentic, agent AI route, where there are tasks and plans, and they follow those through, and they can have personas or whatever that you're asking them to use when they go off and execute whatever they need to do. Um, the more the more of that stuff that works and actually adds value, then you have to think in terms of the clinical trial process. Well, if I'm going to have an AI assistant at the site that's helping the site, that's been fine-tuned or had RAGs based on that protocol and based on that therapeutic area and based on that indication and all that stuff, some of the work that's traditionally been done by other people will go away, or will, the scope will lessen. Um, and I'm curious, like with what you're doing with the Save Our Sites, and certainly the traction that you've been building up over the years, and how social media has changed the game, where we are today versus where we were 10 years ago, where I'm not needing to go to a CRO to access kind of their black book of sites to
Hmm.
understand who the sites are that I need to work with. The sites aren't that difficult to find anymore. They want to be, where, yeah, you laugh and you know more than me. Um, but
It's
I
funny
went,
because I remember the days where, and they still have, clinicaltrials.gov has, a sponsored clinical site in Anaheim, a sponsored clinical site in
yes,
Yuma,
yes,
as if
yes.
they're guarding something, extremely valuable that no one else can get their hands on.
So what's interesting, what's happening with, so firstly, I think some of what you're trying to do is almost like unionizing at the site level,
Hmm.
where you're like, sites need a voice. You try to bypass us. It didn't work very well. At the end of the day, you're giving drugs to patients who've never had these drugs before. People do business with people. We're the people on the ground that are there, and they're our patients. We know them. We see them every day. We're in their communities. So I think there's an element of what you're doing that's almost like unionizing, um, and that in a lot of cases it's badly needed. Um, um, helping solve similar problems for everybody, kind of a rising tide lifts all boats. Um, but also, if you step away from that and you look at what's happening at the sponsor side, a lot of the sponsor companies are bypassing their vendors to work directly with the big tech players in AI to come up with AI solutions.
Hmm.
Because at the end of the day, a lot of the AI solutions are based on their data and their drugs, not
Yes.
Medidata's data or Viva's data or anybody else's data. And uh, fundamentally, also, a lot of software companies are built on, it can take a year to, or more than a year to go, I want to build X. We're going to put it in our roadmap. We're going to define the feature. We're going to write requirements. Somebody's then going to code it. It's going to get tested. It's then going to have all the documentation, everything written with it. It then gets rolled out in a sandbox environment for clients to play with and validate. Then it gets pushed to production. Now we fix anything that might be broken that we hadn't found during the testing phase. But that can take over a year easily. Look at what's happened with large language models in the last year. Like
I
the
like
one,
what that's almost I've considered, because I'm so deep on the site side, it's refreshing to have somebody come from the other side and say, these sponsors are bypassing their vendors, like the established vendors, to find
Moderna,
their own.
OpenAI, Sanofi, I think OpenAI or Microsoft, I think BMS with Google. Like there's big announcements
Wow.
that you see, and they have a lot of budgets and deep incentives to go, how can I use AI to make my organization better?
Because it's almost like so if you go back 2 decades, right, the core competency of a sponsor is market and sell drugs. Well, first develop them, right, which is where we're at,
Hmm.
and then market and sell. The data back then was less valuable. What was the reason for it? FDA needs to see it, right?
Hmm.
That's pretty much it. Like maybe they had some exploratory stuff too. But now that the
Hmm.
tech is here and there's data on everything, now there's data on everything. Data is driving, it's the new oil, it's the new currency. It makes sense for the sponsors to have control of this data rather than it is the byproduct that they're
It's
paying
their
for.
data. It's
At
nobody
the end of
else's
the
data.
day, it's the byproduct of what they're paying for. It makes sense for them to be in control because that could technically open up additional revenue streams or additional opportunities maybe that they haven't seen or considered before. And why let the middleman get the access to these potential revenue streams?
And
Uh,
there are a lot of companies going after like real world evidence and how I can use real world evidence to,
hmm,
do things in safety or do things in clinical trial. But the data in real world evidence is difficult to interpret. It's all over the place.
mhm,
And the other big problem that you run into, it's like if I've got a self-driving car and the map that I teach it on keeps changing, then it ain't that relevant. It
right.
has to be current. There's context to the data. And fundamentally, like we bring drugs to market and we develop drugs in a different way than we used to 10 years ago.
So where does this
And
road end then, as far as you're concerned? Because you're a
I
voice
think
of reason and you know what you're talking about. Where does this end?
I think we have to empower the sites to be successful. We've got to give them the tools that they can more efficiently and effectively do their job with increased oversight at the sponsor level, but in a way that can be easily managed and maintained, and sure there's a role for CROs in that ecosystem, but that a lot of kind of the AIs and the assistants and this is the protocol, so this is what you need to watch out for, a lot of that data and that kind of co-pilot is going to come from the sponsor's data. It's not going to come from the vendor for the ePro system. It's not going to come from, those little niche providers. Like you said at the start, there are what, 15 of them for one trial.
Yeah, IRT, yeah,
Yeah.
EDC, you get the Almac for the shipping
Yeah.
the IP, I mean logistics,
Yeah.
ePro. Yeah, it ends up being like 15 of these things, and why not just have like one company in charge of it all? Or at least a single sign-on, which is at least one step of the way there. It's
Yeah.
one of many steps, but at least it's an initial first step. It's not very innovative.
Well, it's
So the
better than
sponsor,
having 10 laptops like you used to have.
yeah, remember that? We just go right here. Okay, let's do that. I use AI a little bit for creative stuff, and I find myself as an agent doing multiple tasks simultaneously, which yeah, I know is just a very small microcosm of the potential of AI, but I'm here, help me write an article on this video. While it's doing that, I'm on another video editing a short from like the AI is editing a
Mhm.
short. While it's doing that, I'm answering email with an AI assisted inbox. While
Are you
it's
using
doing that,
GBT,
Spark
ChatGPT, or what are you using?
ChatGPT for the text and the Vizard for the video, and then
Mhm.
Spark for the email. But I'm doing like multitasking simultaneously, and my job becomes like this orchestra.
Orchestration.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
just one dude. I can't imagine an organization like using hundreds of these agents, simultaneously. I mean, do you think the pie just gets bigger, or do you think there's limits to where this ultimately creates something entirely different that we haven't thought of yet?
No, I think the fundamentals are always going to be the fundamentals. Um, I think it gets, I think this is going to automate, or at least there'll still be a human in the loop for a lot of these activities because they're not 100% reliable. I, I, a lot of the work, it's like AI is your intern.
Hmm.
They can go off and do the work. They've done maybe 80% of the work, but you still kind of need to check it before you go.
Course, yeah.
I mean, there are ways of improving that accuracy. There are ways of reducing the hallucinations. There are ways of ensuring that if the right answer is no answer, it doesn't try and please you and give you an answer which is wrong. Um, but fine training and rags and all the things that you can do to improve those kinds of things, there's a cost involved in all of that. And if you can justify the cost for that particular use case, then go ahead and do it. But
What is the cost?
not
Computational
everything
power? Or are you
works.
talking about
Well, it might
GPU?
be the computational power, or it might be the GPU, or it might just be the time spent, collecting the data that you're going to use to train it and how you
Mm,
tag it and all the rest. Or it might be the
mm,
programming that's needed to have the right prompts and to have things return in the style that's needed. Or it might just be, every 6 months I need to move to a new model because,
mm.
now I want to use Claude Sonnet and then
So
Llama 3 to model.
basically, not all data has the same ROI. There's data that has significantly high ROI. There's data that's worthless, almost worthless. Is there data that's worthless?
Absolutely.
Hmm. It's a philosophical question. I don't know.
I'm sure, I'm sure you have a lot of data that's worthless to you. Now, whether it's
So
worthless to a
far,
marketer, I don't
worthless so
know.
far. Yeah. So if sites, okay, so sponsors take more control over their, I mean, this is not a new thing. You and I were talking about this back in the Intralinks days in 2016. Hey, sponsor, you can remote monitor now too. You don't have to have CRA go out. You can have your own in-house CRA do. I remember an article. If we go in the archives, we can find one of our Intralinks via articles. I'm sure this came up. That obviously is on steroids now with AI.
Yep.
Where did the CROs fit in? The CROs have to adapt. Is that why they're buying sites or becoming tech companies or what? Like, what's their core competencies changing right before our eyes?
So I always saw that the role of a CRA needed to change in that you wanted the CRA to be a trainer and to be there to assist with what is happening on the ground and help sites understand the protocol and what are not like if all they're doing is there to do source documentation and checking boxes and are acting more like an auditor, like that is a completely different personality type of personality and a different skill set and those I think more of those activities are going to be done remotely using technology. And to your point of, or does all data matter? Well, in a protocol, do all fields you know have an impact on the study endpoint? No, they don't. Some data matters more than others. It depends on the context of the trial, and like we see that with Rave, Medidata CDC system, has a gateway that sends adverse event information to add to safety systems. And when they first built that adverse event that gateway, it would create more work for safety teams than not, because after you've had one adverse event, every time somebody steps on a scale, there would be something new's changed, so that's triggering a follow up with your safety system, even when it isn't necessarily relevant enough that it should equate to that. And they've now changed things so that on a study basis, you get to decide what's going to be significant and what's going to rise to that level. That's worthwhile sending another notification to your safety team. So I do. I think that you can't treat every protocol the same. You can't treat every site the same. But sites need to understand and what like we talked about this one as well. You wanted to know when we were talking about risk-based monitoring, you were like the CROs are scoring us and the sponsors are scoring us, but we don't know where we score and we don't know what our score is. So we don't know where we can improve.
Right.
So I think like if you're talking about oversight and transparency, for it to really work, it should go both ways.
And I think that is happening. Um, why wasn't it going both ways? You can argue that. I mean, maybe the CROs saw it as their competitive edge to not like they're the holders, they're the custodians of the score, but they don't not gonna tell any party what the site scored, right? It's just, hey, sponsor, you trust us, we get the score. I don't think it matters to you, and then sites definitely it doesn't matter to you what your score is. And now I think we are seeing a level of transparency, maybe because the sponsors are demanding it, or maybe because the data is not one that can be hidden as much. I don't know. A lot's
I'm not
changed in a decade, and a lot stayed the same also.
a lot. Yeah, a lot. That's very true. I mean, there are a lot more. I mean, even back then, we were starting to see a trend of more virtual biotechs,
Yep.
where I don't need to make such a big investment in standing up a biotech company and all the infrastructure that goes along with it when I can rely on my partners and specifically CROs to do so much of the heavy lifting for me and to provide the infrastructure that I need to get my drug to the next stage and secure the next right batch of funding. I mean, I don't think that's gone away in any shape or form.
No, and we're since then I'm seeing a lot of biotechs. I'm doing a program of studies with one in particular, super small biotech. I think they recently went public this year, handling everything in-house, everything. And they're actually doing a decent job. Like their
Mhm.
monitors might be better than CRO monitors. There's more transparency for sure. They tell you more or less where you stand. They work with you. It's easier to get a hold of someone. I know it's just one example, but there's more than that. I'm just working with like a handful of studies
Yeah,
at the
that's
time
interesting.
being. And
And
that's all due to tools. Like, yeah, but they're using a lot of off-the-shelf stuff. Like they're using the main EDC vendor. They're
mhm,
partnered with a one thing that does work for them. They mandate e-source for the sites, but they chose the vendor. So
yeah.
that's how they made it work for them.
I mean, part of our go-to-market strategy at Viva for safety was going after these small biotechs and going to them with a message of if you're outsourcing all your safety to your CRO, it's fine for them to be doing all the work for you. But if you end up relying on them to have their own safety database and your data is tucked in there, you can very well end up in a situation where you're held hostage by your data because it can
Mm.
cost you a lot of money to do a data migration. And what we saw that's even worse is that you start to have you often don't go with the same CRO for every single study, and you then start to have your safety data split among CROs. And
Mm.
that's not a good position to be in because if you have your safety data in three or four or five CROs instead of having it all in one place, well, guess what? You kind of do need it in all in one place where so it's worth making that investment earlier on, and it was about how easy and can we make an out the box solution so that they can carry on working with those CROs, but they're working in their system and they're entering data into their safety system, and those three CROs all have segregated access so they can't see each other. But the sponsor can see it all, and it's the sponsor's data, and the sponsor's paying the bill for the system. And if they're not paying the bill for the system, well, the chances are they probably are anyway. The CRO normally charges, for that as a line item, and it's being passed on to them. Um,
Mm.
yeah, and um, as far as go-to-market strategy is pretty effective because it accurately represents the problem and the headaches down the line. That kind of the longer you take it to address it, the easier it is. If you've only got 100 adverse events, well, you can just and you get a new safety system. You can tell your CROs to manually re-enter them. If you're
Right.
starting to get thousands, now you're talking about data migration projects, and you could be looking at $500,000 easily, depending on your volume.
And as these tools become more ubiquitous, right? Like technology gets further ingrained into all of our lives. Open AI is open source. It used to be maybe intimidating to develop your own tools. Now I know sites fed up with the lack of solutions hire their own developer. I kid you not, Andrew. 2 weeks ago, my friend, I don't know if she wants me to mention her name, but shout out to Gabby Marinello in Miami. She reached out to me. Hey, do you know any tech developer? I said, yeah, but for what? Like, you're a site. What are you doing? She said, yeah, but I'm fed up with like the lack of, this and that. And I said, okay, so something like Creo? And she said, yeah, but no, not exactly. Like, I want like something custom. And 10 years ago, can you imagine a site? I mean, it still sounds weird, but it's
Well,
possible. It's weird slash possible. And I think 10 years from now, it's gonna be just everyone does it. It's no longer weird. Like building your own stuff, right? Taking control of your tools, like building your tools. It shouldn't be in the hands of some large group that has other agendas as well.
How easy was it to build your website when you got started?
Very difficult. And now,
Yeah. How
like
easy is it
that,
now to go and either ask AI to do it, might do it badly, or just go to like a website company and do use some
Squarespace.
templates?
Shout out to Squarespace. I love Squarespace. And yeah,
Yeah,
point.
like or you want to do e-commerce and you use Shopify or
hmm
whatever. Like
hmm
it's so easy to plug these things in. We'll see the
Wow.
same.
So,
I think there's a lot of B2C tech that we're going to start seeing those best practices in B2B.
so do you think sites, and just like the CROs got away from their core competencies? I mean, I think even they would tell you that there's a lot more money to be made last decade building these tech like the e-pros. Have you ever seen, you've seen these RFPs before? Like I got my hands on a few as I threw my hat in the CRO space for some small IIT trials, and we're looking at some line items going, looking at ourselves like, what is this? Is this actually the cost? Like this is insane bloat. Like we can do this way less. The sponsors, how is it possible? Every quote we get is like 10 times this. Well, this is like this is their thing that they're selling you. We can get this off the shelf for like at least half the cost, and that's not even looking hard. Do you think sites eventually get away from their core competency when they start dabbling in these kind of things and then they realize maybe they find something that really works? I learned this from Charlie Munger. I read Charlie Munger's almanac recently. Uh, the guy who invented the cash register, right?
I I think there will always be startups that pivot and that
Mm.
find new things and then go off and do new things and that are successful. But in general, sites will be sites. Sites
Sites
are
will
not
be
going to become
sites, yeah.
tech companies overnight. Building software, especially in this
Mm,
space with life sciences and all the regulations that we have, it's hard. It's not
mm.
easy. It's not something that happens overnight. Like, how are you accounting for disaster recovery? How are you accounting for European, data protection rules and how they're different from one country to another?
Well, that's when we
It's
need people like you, the consult. Bring in Andrew, bring in Darshan Kulkarni.
yeah.
You guys will
I mean,
handle it.
thank you. But I think we try and we enjoy it because it's fun to have a problem to solve. But I also think like you have to fundamentally remember that just because you have a solution to a problem and you think that that solution is cool and you've got a smart solution to that problem. That doesn't necessarily mean, and even if the solution technically works,
Mhm.
it doesn't necessarily mean that the time is right and that the market is ready for it and you're going to have any success at a business or an adoption. So let's take the example we touched on earlier. Well, I touched on earlier where we're talking about how we're going to how companies are investing in AI for synthetic control arms and synthetic subjects in a
In
clinical trial.
silica, in
In,
silica.
exactly. Now, if we take that to its very endpoint, and let's assume that the technology works, and I can essentially simulate a clinical trial using AI, and
It's over.
no patient actually ever needs to take the drug.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's technically it works, and I get results that are
Time to find a
effective.
new industry, man. Maybe not you, but definitely me.
No, wait. Here's the thing. Okay. Now I'm at the doctor's office, and the doctor offers my gran two different versions, two different pills. The one pill went through the tried and tested way. The other pill, no patient has ever taken during clinical trials. Which one do you think she's going to take? Which ones do you think the regulators are likely to approve, without friction? I think
True.
I think just because it works doesn't mean it will be successful. And certainly when it comes to AI, a lot of companies will be sitting on the sidelines, kind of eating popcorn, and cheering on whoever is on that bleeding edge, trying to push the stuff through because they've got their hard work cut out. And the benefit in being first to market with something like this has to really be significant, especially when the underlying foundational models that you're building on, the tech is evolving so fast. What do I gain from being first to market versus watching what's going on, staying current with the tech, and then playing leapfrog? Once somebody has broken all those glass ceilings that need to be done with the agencies and with the market and everything else.
Mhm.
And
I think that's what some sites are doing, though. I think
yeah,
a lot of these site networks, you can see these VC-backed site networks, what are they doing now? They're investing in tools, like they're hiring developers. They want to be the next CROs. They see billions of dollars of market cap that sponsors are dissatisfied with. I mean, it's no secret. Like the majority of
mhm.
CROs, sponsors have a very bad perception of CROs. It's like necessary evil, but like that eventually is going to happen where the tech becomes so ubiquitous that sites are able to have different applications for it or maybe tweak the tech to actually be patient centric and sponsor centric. Whereas with CROs, it's just investor centric tech.
But we're not going to solve it by committee. It's going to get
Yeah.
solved through startups doing the same thing. I
Through the
mean, if you look
market.
at,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not SIP.
It's not SIP, no. It's definitely not SIP. Have you ever played with SIP recently?
Not recently, no.
It's no better, man. I was on there one day and it started like strobing, like strobe light effect, and I went to every other window, normal, like normal. Back to this thing, flashing, man. I was gonna have a seizure if I kept looking at this thing. That's SIP. They don't care about the user interface really. Even Andrew, sponsors apologize to me when they say you need to use SIP for our study. They say it like they're giving you
I mean,
bad news.
when SIP first was announced, before it even came out, it just led to a whole bunch of capital that would have been spent on solutions going away because it was like, we can't make a decision. We can't buy anything. Our company's made an announcement that we're joining this program. And now we're in it for the next, I don't know, however many years before we can, sheepishly realize that we need to invest in something else. Um,
Do you think you know how the big pharma? I went to you with you to one of these things in San Diego. Remember when I got that? Oh man, if I could find that, that would be, dude, I still have it. This is the book, man. Is this the
uh,
Moleskin Intralinks? Remember? No, this
yeah,
is not
yeah, yeah.
it. No, no. But I have it
Yeah,
somewhere.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
That conference you took me to in San Diego with Intralinks. That was like J&J or I don't know, one of the big ones. Investing in a bunch of startup incubators, all life science ones, right?
Yep.
Are any of them investing in tech incubators or AI incubators?
I don't know. I think that there's more blurring of the lines than there ever have been before. I've certainly seen, like, if you go and talk to Moderna, for example, they talk a lot more like a software company and
Hmm.
less like a pharma company. And
Hmm.
if you look at some of their executive hires, some of their hires have come from places like Amazon, like AWS. So there's definitely more of a blurring of the line. And I mean, there are plenty of pharma companies now that have significant IT spends that are building their own stuff, that have adopted Agile as a software development methodology. I think also part of that is like our fundamental business has changed. We're not just shipping pills into pharmacists who then prescribe. When somebody walks through the door, there's a device component to so much of the medication, of the drugs that we do. Whether it's an injectionable or whatever, and um, the intelligence of that device is only going to keep increasing, given how fast things are moving in the space. And so there are a lot more combo products than we've seen before, and the connectivity and the intelligence of what is happening on those devices is, I think, also forcing a lot more companies to not necessarily become device companies, but to have, you know, to invest in those skill sets. Because they're writing code. They're not just, in a lab.
Mhm. And this
I mean,
trickles,
what do you see?
well, I see from the site side, that's one of the reasons we started SOS. We thought the timing was right. From the sponsor side, I'm always trying to ascertain where they're at because I know like they have plenty of money to invest, and I've always wondered why they don't just grow through vertical integration. Um, instead of outsourcing the vendors and the tools, why not just own them outright? Outside of the sites, maybe, although I think sponsors can, I think they do own phase one sites in some cases, right? Healthy
Hmm.
volunteers, early stage testing. Maybe they're trying to avoid anti-kickback in that case, but they don't have to go that far, but at least go like one layer below, like vendor, CRO type of stuff.
I
Um,
think it's difficult for a service provider to build tech.
hmm,
Like we've seen a lot of examples of that, like look in the EDC space. Um, I also think it's difficult. I mean, it's difficult for a consultancy company to build tech.
yeah.
It's certainly I can't imagine it's that easy for a pharma company to build tech that's going to benefit the industry and not just their organization.
Or at least acquire, like Thermo Fisher acquired PPD, but PPD still behaves like a just any other CRO, right? It's not like
Yeah.
their IP now, even though they own it. And I don't know if that was a successful acquisition or not. And 5 years later, when was that? 3 years later, Thermo Fisher PPD. Back then, it was like big news. Like, wow, our sponsor's gonna buy CROs? Well, no, doesn't look like it.
Yeah.
First of all, there's not enough for every
Yeah.
sponsor to buy one. Um, what do you think was the reason behind that acquisition, Thermo and PPD? They're
I
just
don't know.
diversifying, or
There were a lot of there's been a lot of big acquisitions in the CRO space. Like, I mean, obviously IQVIA, IMS Health,
well, like
IMS
if
Health and
Eli
Quintiles.
Lilly buys IQVIA, okay, now we get a new paradigm shift. Like,
But IQVIA, half of their clients are all of Eli Lilly's competitors. It becomes
right,
tricky. Why
right.
do I want to? So then all that business
Well,
goes
then you
away.
lose that CRO. Yeah, then you basically bought a CRO and a tech company with capabilities to just monitor your studies and no one
Yeah.
else's. So it becomes a competitive advantage because now your competitors have to find someone else. But maybe that'd be a good thing for them. You'd be encouraging them to build their own in-house or something.
I don't think there's enough of an incentive, and there's
Nah.
too much risk that goes wrong. And I also think, um, you know, you need to stay focused on what you're good at.
Yes, but you also need to figure out how to put yourself out of business before the market does,
Oh,
which is kind of what
absolutely.
I
You
think
need to reinvent yourself. Absolutely.
the CROs see that with their business model and maybe buying site networks.
I, yeah, I can see why they might want to do that.
And not
Um,
the views are yours and not of your former employer. I mean, you're just talking
yeah.
like an industry thought leader right now, which you definitely
And
are
I'm
beyond
in
qualified.
safety, so I'm not going
Yeah,
to say I'm an expert in study startup anymore. That
you
was a long
weren't
time
privy
ago.
to that stuff, right? Or maybe who
Yeah.
knows? But it's just your opinions. I mean, I have plenty of my own. I think sites are going to be in an interesting place, and I think as more sites consolidate, I fear that they might start behaving like the type of organizations you were describing to open the video with.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's my
Well,
fear.
yeah. Well, then you're not going to be efficient and effective, and the business at the end of the day, the business will go somewhere else.
And that's why there's always, as long as there's new private practice. Now, if we want to talk healthcare in general, private practice is kind of dying breed. Like you're just seeing health systems dominate. Some places like San Francisco Bay Area is just dominant. Only you can't find a private practice physician.
Well, I was having an interesting conversation the other day with a dentist, and I didn't realize how many dentistries are owned by private equity,
Yep.
and that their business model is like the hairdresser, where essentially they're renting the chair, and they get paid based on, how much time and what procedures they do, in who's sitting in that chair.
Nail salons too. I know nail salons
Yeah,
getting
exactly.
gobbled up by private equity. So research sites as well. Uh, just goes to show you sometimes the best innovations come from where the rubber meets the road. And that's where I forgot the guy's name, but the guy who had a hardware store and his employees kept stealing from him and he invented the cash register and then promptly closed his hardware store and sold the cash register and helped a bunch of other
Yep.
hardware stores
Yeah.
since then, right? So I think the innovations are gonna come in the next decade from the bottom up as opposed to the top down. I think that might be a new paradigm um, that we're gonna see.
I think so. I think also, like AI, going back to the whole AI thing, it's here to stay.
Mm,
Um, More and more people enter the workforce that are familiar with using it,
yep.
and whether they're using it, as the equivalent of shadow IT or not, like it's already being used. People use it in their day job, even if their bosses might not know or be aware of it. Um,
What
yeah, you're laughing
what
badly.
what advice do you have for sites right now or job seekers? So there's sites or job seekers. They're watching this and they're saying,
So,
okay, I want to mess around with AI. Like, how do I not get left behind?
um, I would look for what are the right places to follow, who are the experts that you want to read up about it. There is a lot of hype. Um, if you're still using ChatGPT, for example, you're at least for now you're being left behind,
Wow.
because there are new models that are out.
I need to
And
switch.
yes,
I'm paying for it too.
yeah, I stopped paying for it a little while ago,
What do you
and
recommend I switch to?
I'm using Claude, but
Ah,
Claude Sonnet, but there are lots of different things. Like Meta just brought out Llama 3.1, which is open source. That's pretty good. I think this last week, there's is it Mistral brought out a new model. It's moving so fast.
hmm.
The point is, what you're using now might be very different to what you were
Irrelevant.
using
Yeah.
6 months ago,
Yeah.
and you need to stay current with what is happening in the space, and also with what it's good at and what it isn't good at.
Hmm.
Um, I also fundamentally like the large language models are there to make predictions. They can't reason. They don't know the context. Um, and it's like tools that you learn how to use. And you learn when they're good for the job and when they're not good for the job. And the only way you can kind of get used to that is by using them.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not something that you can just pick up every now and then and think you're going to be any good at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I started messing with it. It even made some source documents for us as we're playing around with it after multiple prompts and uploading it to Creo, changing it, but it gets you past that writer's block. Some of like for a coordinator, the hardest thing to do when you're tasked with create source document is just to start. And I
Mm-hmm.
think with the right prompts, it actually does a very good job of eliminating that, the AI I'm talking about. And
Gives
then
you
it
some
gives
of
you
the
something,
structure and yeah.
yeah, and then it gives you something to play with. Okay, now it's easier for me to fix it. And, it got me half the way there with a few more prompts may get me like a little bit closer, but ultimately you still need adult supervision and, but playing
Yep.
around with it, not as opposed to just being caught off guard and, having to do a leapfrog into something else.
There's an interesting comment from a CIO of a big company, big company, that decided not to use Microsoft Copilot for and roll that out to all their employees. And obviously, one of um, the big use cases that's seen as beneficial for Copilot is when I'm in a meeting, it will automatically create a summary of what was said during the meeting as well as the transcript, and maybe it'll manage action items and all the other wonderful things it can do. And I've always thought about, like, okay, that's great, but if it's a board meeting, there's a different level of confidentiality to whether it's just my Monday morning status report meeting with my team. And you have to have levels of governance of your data that not
Yeah.
every organization has. But the point that he brought back was like, yes, I acknowledge that this might make me more efficient as an organization. But what I'm really scared about is what happens when there's legal discovery because I might be liable for something. And my lawyer and my counsel are telling me that whatever benefits I might be getting, the dangers that come from now collecting all this data. Because going back to your point of, is all data good or bad or useless? Well, some data can be harmful.
Yeah.
And, do I need all this on record of what was said, especially if what is on record may not be 100% accurate because it might hallucinate and it might make a guess and it might not be 100% accurate as to what was said. Am I ready to start storing all of this stuff in my organization? And their answer was absolutely not.
Absolutely not. But people are still gonna do it, and we're still gonna get to the other side of this bridge
Yes,
one way or
yes,
another.
yes, absolutely. People are still going to do it, but you know,
Mm.
there's a difference to you and I doing it and rolling it out and using it as part of how we do our jobs in our day lives and all the people around us to, I'm in a 10,000 person company and I'm rolling it out across my organization
To
and it's turned on.
everyone, that's crazy.
Or I'm shipping a laptop and there's now a button on that a key on that keyboard that has Copilot on,
Or can you
which we
imagine
already.
all the organizations using Slack that now you can build like a AI layer on top of it to go back in the past and look through all the chat history and come up with like all kinds of findings that you're like, wait a minute, like you no longer have that plausible culpability
Liability.
of hey, I didn't know this was not the case,
It was
this
never
was
discussed. Yeah, yeah.
well, now you have another layer showing you like, yes, it actually was, and here's the transcript.
I mean, back at the day when I was at Intralinks and we were doing safety letter distribution. So the SUSARs that go to the sites, that go to
Yeah,
you guys,
we love
okay,
those.
that everybody that used to cost like $90 to ship a SUSAR because
Thank you
it
for
would
those
literally
too, by the way. Our PIs love you, Andrew.
it's our pleasure. Um, but you would get a lot of sponsors and a lot of CROs where they wanted to make the process more efficient and they wanted to save money, but they wanted to just do enough to be able to show that they'd met their regulatory obligation and that they were compliant. They didn't actually care about understanding whether anybody had read those letters or not. And did it actually arrive at the right place? And was it
Correct.
filed correctly and all of that? Because if you know that there's a problem, you now have to do something about that problem. And you need to have a process and everything's got to be defined, all that. When all they want to do is say, I've done my job, I've met the requirements, everything else is the CRA's problem. And that's
Right.
not my problem and that's not my budget. And
Right.
I'm already struggling with what, I have to do in my organization with
Right.
the resources that I've got.
Or, and I'm sure you come across this, or maybe not. I can't imagine you didn't. You get a series of SUSARs go to PIs. 80% of PIs just sign it and don't look at it, right? But
Hmm.
there's
Hmm.
20% that are like, no, I'm not going to enroll anymore in the study. Forget it. We're not enrolling anymore. There's too many of these SUSARs I've been seeing, and there's
Hmm.
something wrong with the drug. That's an unintended consequence the sponsor doesn't want to have.
Absolutely. Yeah. But the way you communicate to the sites needs to be done properly.
Well, the way it's done is please log in. You haven't logged. No, the way it's done really is Hey, coordinator, your PI hasn't logged in to sign off on the last two SARs in like 2 weeks. Make sure it's done. And then if it, and they keep getting this email until it's done. And that's it. They don't care. There's no communication. It's just get it signed and that's it.
And do you know which ones are more important than others?
If you read it, that's where the human activity comes in. And if you have a good coordinator, they're going to tell the PI beforehand, hey, look, this is what do we do about this? We have a patient that's maybe similar. That's where the
Mhm.
PI might say, hey, I don't want people like that in. I don't like this, what I'm seeing on these two SARs.
But at the end of the day, yes, we want to enroll subjects in the trial, but we also want to manage the adverse events because efficacy versus safety. And if the safety equation isn't right, then your drug ain't going to get proved either.
Yep.
So it's in the sponsor's best interest that when there are adverse events, that you understand the risks and you manage the risks and you communicate the risks and what you're supposed to do um, to, mitigate and minimize, what can happen.
Yeah.
I guess that comes again back to kind of the bigger point that you've been making quite a bit, which is I'm tired of working with on studies where people don't seem to care enough about the drug and the trial, and that's why you liked working with the sponsor directly.
It's much more pleasant.
Yeah.
And you feel like you're part of a team, honestly. And I'm not one for much kumbaya, but there's a sense of pride that you can tell the other side has in their work that just
Hmm.
makes you want to work a little harder. It's intangible, but compounded, I think it's worth the ROI.
But
Like,
we
oh,
all
these
want to
guys
work,
care. These guys have pride in their study. I might as well too. Like, if
and that's infectious. Absolutely.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. And we all want to do stuff that we're proud of. We all want to work with people that care about their jobs.
We all want to do
And
meaningful things too with our
yeah,
lives.
yeah. And at the end of the day, people do business with people.
At the end of the day, yeah. And technology eliminates middleman or creates more, depending on which strategy you choose. Choose wisely, sponsors.
Yeah.
You think they listen to this? I don't think the
I'm sure
sponsors
some
do.
do. I'm sure some do.
Well, everyone
We've
should
had a
listen to
lot
you.
of that now. We've been going on for a while.
We've been going on. This could be a 3 hour long pod. Do you have like a drink or do you want to do an intermission and come back or you want to just do a part
Drinking might
two?
be dangerous. Yeah, but always happy to chat.
We'll do a part two because we can keep going, but whenever we get someone like you who has worked in the space for 2 decades or more, and you have a deep, nuanced understanding of the interworkings, not just the academic textbook answers, but well, what does it actually
Yeah.
mean? Like, what's the deeper meaning? And can you like foresee out in the future? These are the things AIs can't do, but these are the things
Yeah.
Andrew Mitchell can do.
Oh, I try. I mean, the devil's in the detail, and what looks good in a PowerPoint slide, like when the rubber hits the road, is not, and real world scenarios that you know all too well about. It's not
Yes.
necessarily the same.
Are you gonna be
Yeah.
at SOS? You're gonna come to Oklahoma? April.
Send me the details. I'll see
We
what
gotta
I can
get you
do.
on a panel, man.
That'll be fun.
We just gotta reverse engineer a panel for you. What do you want the panel to be on?
I'll think about it and let you know. But
How
probably something to
AIs
do with safety.
how AIs will eliminate CROs or not that?
I don't think they're going to eliminate CROs. We need CROs. I mean, like, we need to empower small biotechs to bring drugs to market without the capital investment. But yeah, it's a complicated topic. But I definitely think AI is going to substantially change the game.
I think so too. And with the 2026 patent cliff coming for a bunch of big pharma, we're depending on these biotechs to be
Hmm.
successful. Like all of us are. Me, you, the big pharma that we work with, they buy these biotechs ultimately, like they buy the IP. So
Hmm.
a lot's counting on the shoulders of small companies that don't know what the hell they're getting themselves into. And they've been led astray sometimes by these predatory middlemen. But we'll end
They
it
don't.
before we're all sober, by the way. So
Yeah.
haven't been
They
haven't
might
been
not
trying.
always know what they're getting in for, and they're often looking for hand holding. But at the end of the day, like the ones that are successful are going to get acquired, or their drugs are going to be licensed.
Mhm.
So let's say by big pharma, speaking, generalizing, which means they're going to become big pharma's problem. So if the
Sure.
data ain't right the first time, you're going to make a much bigger problem downstream. So it's in everybody's interests to solve this problem and make it easier for these smaller biotechs.
I think that's a good way to wrap it up. Um, Everybody go connect with Andrew. If you're watching the video, his LinkedIn is underneath. If you're listening on the podcast, thank you. His LinkedIn's in the show notes. We got to do a part two very soon. Andrew, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks for what you and your guys are doing to help,
Thank you.
with what's
A-
happening at site.
And the sun is still shining in Boston. This is amazing, Andrew.
Yeah, it's a beautiful evening.
It's late as hell. Bye bye.